And we're live. We're live. Welcome, Cath Molloy. With a cup of coffee today, because it's only 9 o'clock here in Perth. What are you having there?
I might be moving over to champagne later, but I've just bought this. I've just bought this back from where was I? Ireland, just to remind my husband.
What does it say again? I can't read too good.
I'm amazing, not perfect.
That's great. Well, cheers. When we met, when you were giving your talk at that event, the annual event in Melbourne a few weeks back, you touched on that you'd climbed up the most dangerous mountain in the world, and then you sort of skipped over it and went on to the other thing. I said, hang on. What was that all about? While we have a moment now, can you tell us what was that about?
Well, it's funny that you should ask. I have some show and tell here. Quite often I talk about fear.
Okay.
It's one of those things we do to self-sabotage. And there's 6 things we do. And I speak about fear, and for me, it's about facing everything and rising. And I'd just been speaking in China, in Shanghai. And when I finished, I generally tag on a few days where I'm going to a country I haven't been before. And especially I've worked in China, and you generally get asked to go and work in different companies. So I was then asked to go to Beijing or Xi'an. Now, I hadn't been to Xi'an. I had been to Beijing. And so I took the job there to work with a team for 2 days, and I had 2 days left. And they said they'd take me to the Terracotta Warriors, which was fantastic. Oh, yeah. And then we went to a spa after, and it was just the most beautiful place. It was picturesque, just like the children's books my dad used to read me of Rikki Tikki Tempo. I don't know if anyone knows that story.
Yeah.
So good. So there I was with 1 day left, and they said to me, you can go to the top of this mountain. They had the little gondolas, and I've been in them in the snow and traveled. I thought, I'm scared of heights, but I love when I get to the top and take all these photos. And so I thought that'd be a great thing to do. So the car picked me up the next morning at 6 a.m. and took me to the mountain. And the people taking me, I had a thin backpack. I always travel with a very thin backpack because you never know when you need it. And I had a bottle of water, an apple, and I took some money. And I took a little hand towel from the hotel in case, because it was very hot, about 40 degrees. Anyway, they pulled up, and I said, where's the cable car? And they said, no, you walk. I said, I walk. I'm looking at this mountain. They go, you walk. And there's 5 climbing mountains in China, I've since found out. And I sort of looked at it, and I found out that the North Point was only about an hour or so up. Now, I won't give my age away, but I'm not too young, and I'm not too old, and definitely haven't done enough exercise, because we're always on planes, in lounges, getting to the next event. And so I wasn't regularly exercising, and I thought I'll just get to the top and see what happens. 3 thoughts crossed my head. And the first one was I saw this man walk past me with all these bottles and started to climb. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I guess I can do it. And then I thought, well, it's a little bit like business. They had all these little steps just chiseled into the rocks. And I just thought, just take one step at a time and see where you get to. And the third thing was, as I was halfway up, was what goes up must come down. And so I thought I'll just have to worry about that when the time comes. So when they dropped me off, they also told me they'd pick me up in 8 hours. I was like, 8 hours. And on the mountain, I was the only sort of Caucasian there, and no one was speaking English. And so I got to the North Point, and it was pretty. I took some photos. You can see them back on my Facebook, I think 2016 or 2017. And I looked behind me, which I now know is called Dragonback, and I just thought, I'm going to have a go because I've got this far and I'm feeling okay. So I whipped out my phone and did a Facebook Live because nobody in the world knew where I was
Yeah. Okay.
at this stage in my life. So I thought, if they don't hear from me, they'll know where my last place. So I took out this phone, and believe it or not, I remember a little bit of water was on my face. So I must have thought it was a little bit of fear. And, one of my top values is courage, having a go at whatever. So anyway, I just started to climb, and I climbed this mountain, and I got to the top, and I crossed the side, and I went to each point, and believe it or not, I actually found the cable car on the other side of the mountain. The only problem was I couldn't go down it because I would never get picked up by this company that dropped me off to where I landed. So I knew I was going to go back down. I had a little bit of a rest up there. I bought another bottle of water. I used my white towel, and I climbed down the mountain. And when they picked me up, they said, "Oh, you look so good. Didn't you climb?" I said, "I climbed." I felt amazing. And one of the most interesting things was I now don't have a fear of heights. I'm quite happy to look down, take photos from everywhere. So I kind of say now I don't know what my comfort zone is. However, what happened was, I talk about fear, I talk about sabotage, and I was in Sydney in 2020 in January about to go on stage, and I thought I need to look up this name of this mountain so I can tell people. However, at that stage, I really didn't know the name of the mountain or the history of the mountain, and this is what I saw on Google.
Oh, okay. World's deadliest hike. So you went to the top of that.
So I went to the top of it, and I was really like, when I saw this in my hotel room, I nearly fell off the bed, because if you said to me, "Cath, we're going to go and hike the world's deadliest hike," I can let you know right now, there is no way, no way I would have done it. And I probably would have had to train.
How are your knees on the way down? Because China is fond of having these things, lots of little steps, and they seem to go on forever. Yeah. I've seen them. I've been there. I worked in China, and
Lots of
often the
little
problem
steps.
is your knees coming down.
Correct. Well, you know what the really weird thing was?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sore. I wasn't sore that day. I wasn't sore the next day. I wasn't sore the day after. So obviously I felt really exhilarated by it, but I couldn't believe. So I guess, the interesting thing is that's come out of it is, if I was told I was going to do it, I wouldn't do it. Or I might have had to train for 7 months to do that. But, it just reminds me a little bit of business. If someone said to me, "Hey, Cath, you're going to start a business in the global financial crisis, and you're going to work 10 years at nearly 7 days a week. You're going to be away from home so much. Sometimes we work nearly, 12-hour days when you're starting off a business those first 3 years. And then there's going to be a disease that spreads around the world that's going to shut all your stages and business down." I'd have to say, would I have done that or just enjoyed my time? I don't know. But the thing is, it's really good. It's really good that we don't have that crystal ball, because, without that knowledge,
and fill in the gaps. Tell us a bit about yourself.
All these things wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have been helping so many people around the world if I'd known what was going to happen 10 years later.
So just fill in some gaps there and tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, great. So apart from my age, I'm a mum of I'm a mum of three children. I have 4.5 horses, like a little mini. I've got a cow, 4 sheep, 4 goats. I don't know why we have 4 of everything. And we've got about 6 chickens. I only have 1 husband. And I'm living on 17 acres that I decided to buy in 2018, because I was always traveling in cities that I wanted to come back to some rest and peace and the planet Earth, a little piece of our own plot. And I always had this thing in my head, if something happened in the world, having 17 acres and it had about 4 buildings on it, that there'd be a place for everyone in the family, and you can grow your own food, so we're quite resourceful here. We're on tank water. We've got about 7 tanks. So who knew that COVID was coming? But it was that little bit of an idea I had in my head that we would be okay having some land.
So it was more of a lifestyle thing. It wasn't that you were going to become a doomsday prepper or anything, was it? Huh?
No, definitely not. But it's funny. I'm always thinking ahead, but very, very present in the moment as well.
But if things had gone south, filling up one of those outbuildings with toilet paper and baked beans. Huh?
No, we haven't done that yet. I haven't seen that in the plan, but there's always an opportunity.
You told me your place is up in Queensland, but you're not from Queensland, are you?
Yeah, I was born and bred on the Sunshine Coast, so there's not very many of us. Yeah, not very many of us here. And I started traveling at about the age of 18. So it's still my favorite place to come home to. It's a great base. We're only an hour from the city, the Brisbane city, and we've also got an apartment down there because I do a lot of work in Brisbane. So I spend my time between the country and the city, which I've always loved. When I was growing up, I was very fond of horses and the smell of horses. And I finally had a horse when I was 16. And of course, full circle, I've now got horses and I'm riding again, which is wonderful. When I was young, I also really loved fundraising and sending money to the Children's Hospital. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older, actually, when I started my own business and we were giving away 10% and now 30% of what we are making to Watoto and the orphans in Africa. And when I started working with them, I didn't even, think back to go, wow. When I was born, I was left here in Australia from a mum from another country. So I didn't have a mum or a dad here. So, they can say that's orphans. And then there was 3 months before I was adopted. So, but unfortunately, I lost my mum when I was 16. So there's a lot of different things that have happened. And to find myself working back with orphans and helping children, and every Christmas we take books to the Children's Hospital up here for children between, babies right through to the age of 16, and we find out, we ring up 2 days before who's in there, and then we bring a couple of spares, because the most favorite thing as a child for me was lying in bed and having someone read a story to me. And so I did that with my children. My children all love books. We're all bookaholics, and we all swap books at Christmas time. So it's wonderful when you start to see your life and you're doing the same things that you were doing as a child in your adult years. I think that's our purpose. As a child, what you love and what you want to do. And then to be able to do that as an adult in our life, it just it makes my heart sing.
So how did you actually get into this? I mean, what started all this? Because I know you I saw you speaking in Melbourne and read your book, okay? But how did you get into it? I mean, with the speaking and the books, what was the trigger that actually started all this?
Okay, so I think people do things for 2 reasons. One is through inspiration, but inspiration doesn't always lead to action. And the second thing is through desperation. So, the famous global financial crisis back in 2009, my husband actually fell ill and hasn't gone back into work since. So we had a business with 18 staff, and it was my husband's business. I was looking after the children, running a couple of little home businesses. So I stepped in and went into the business. I really loved it. It was a real estate. And within 3 weeks, I sold 5 properties in 1 week, 3 on one day. And I said to John, if you're happy to look after the home, I will go into work, full time. And he said, in actual fact, he felt while we had the business, he wasn't going to get better.
Okay.
So, because he'd always be thinking about it. So We had to sell the business in a recession. We had properties tied up to it, which meant we sold everything at a loss. We lost well over $1 million. We were left with a mortgage on one house and no jobs. And the bank didn't know this yet. So I took out $50,000 and I thought, this is my time to do what I love and what I can do to make a difference. And so the first thing was, training and education, customer service, product knowledge was my favorite thing.
But is that what you love? You said you want to do what you love. Is that what you love?
Yep, absolutely. When I was 19, when I was 19, I started traveling to third world countries, and I started to see how people negotiated, and a lot of it was in that first contact, and most of it was done through a handshake. And you could see sometimes people would walk away really upset and yelling at the seller, and sometimes the seller would chase the buyer away and the buyer would leave in tears. Sometimes it went really well. And what I just started to discover was how to match that handshake with the person that I was meeting that was selling. Now, I mightn't have always got the best deal, but I got a really good deal. And what would happen is they would then bring better deals to me along the way. So I started to learn all this negotiation skill. And when I was in the bank by the age of 22, which bank? No, not that bank. It was the CBA, but that in those days was the Commercial Bank of Australia. And they merged with Westpac. We became, they merged with New South Wales, the Bank of New South Wales, and we became Westpac. And I was topping sales in the branches I was going in. And then I was winning the sales each month for Queensland, and they'd give me trips away. And then I was topping Australia-wide. And so they brought me in, what are you doing? And I studied body language. And then I was just working with customers. And the biggest thing is most people don't really talk to the customers, except for how's the weather, love your shoes. And that's a great start. Yeah. But if we don't let people know what we've got, then we haven't really served them, because so many times, you go to buy a phone, you let them know what you want, but they don't tell you the other things that you could get. And so you end up with something that's not 100% right. You get home, someone else says to you, oh, you should have got this, this, and this. And you're like, why didn't they tell us? So I believe to really serve the customers, you need to let the customers know what you do offer. And it's that easy by speaking to them, finding out what they're up to, letting them know if you've got a better product. And so for me, it was never felt like selling. It was just serving. Okay. And so then I went in training people in customer service and product knowledge and body language, but not everyone got that. And it wasn't until I studied behaviors that I understood why it works so well for some and not so well for others. So getting people to understand these skills, because every single skill can be learned. It just depends if you want to or not.
Yeah. So what was then the driving force that made you want to put pen to paper, like with your first book, which was the $1 Million Handshake? What made you put pen to paper on that one?
Yeah, so going back to when I was 40 and I started this training company, in that first year, we actually signed over $1 million in contracts. And I was telling John, I was telling the accountant, this is going really well. This is what's happening. And unfortunately, we could have done a lot of things to use that money to buy a building, etc., which we did do later. But instead, I ended up paying $400,000 in tax over the next couple of years. So there's a lot of things that I've been able to help businesses do, especially because we went vertical. I had 18 staff by the end of 2 years. So I know a lot of the things that work and don't work. And I went into further studies. So when it was about 2014, I was on the education task force for the council, and I was invited to go to China on one of the missions. And while I was there, they asked us to speak. And so I spoke on cultural communication, because this is what was coming up from what I was hearing from every meeting we were going to. And just remember, I'm in education and training. So I addressed the audience of a couple of hundred people over lunch, and also understood who was the most important people in the room. And so this time we had a translator, simultaneous translator. So as I spoke, then they were speaking. It would give me a moment to make sure that I made great eye contact, that I nodded. And so after the event, they went up to our mayor and asked to be introduced to me to come back to speak to a much larger audience of around 600 translators, to talk to them about cultural communication. And that was the first time that I'd spoken to such a large audience that I realized, when it came to training and education, because my training business had taken off, that we can help more than 20 people in a room at a time. I've trained hundreds of people in a room at a time through workbooks. I've now spoken to over 3,000 people in a room. And I realized that we can sow seeds that can make a difference, no matter where we're from. We don't need necessarily just to have a small group to make a difference. So that really kickstarted my speaking career then. I was picked up and asked to help another speaking company with their people coming through, and do feedback on body language and help them with mindset. And so my keynote was the $1 Million Handshake. And I would get people up on stage. We talk about the first impressions. I love when you have a conference come together and the first thing they do is really learn to connect and communicate, because the rest of the conference is amazing to watch what happens through it. You know, it's energizing, engaging. And so that kind of got around, you know, people were booking me. And then I just got off from a TV station where I was talking around the business of body language. I was in a taxi coming back from there, and I received a call to meet a person from Hachette, the book company. Mm-hmm. So they're the second largest book company in the world under Puffin. And the taxi driver, when I hung up, said, "Excuse me, ma'am." He said, "Can I ask what you do?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I'm a trainer, and you know, this is what I do." And he goes, "Oh, ma'am, I think you do more than that." And I said, "Oh, no, that's what I do. I'm a speaker trainer." And he goes, "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind, but I heard your conversation." And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "I think you're an author." Now, I went to write a book about 4 years ago, and I just turned it into workshops. But the interesting thing is, I then turned my workshops back into the book, because in my head, it was like everyone writes a book and everyone's handing their book out, and you know, who wants to read it, sort of thing, which is a story that we tell ourselves to self-sabotage. Of course, everyone's got a story, and of course, everyone can write a book. But this is what was holding me back. And so when I was in the car, he then said, "Ma'am, I'm so excited to tell my wife I've had an author in the car today." And I was looking up at the universe, and I was like, okay, I'm getting the message. But for me to really push me, I decided, because I really hate fundraising. It is so much work. And I thought, if I gave a 30% of this, whatever comes through the book, to the charity, then maybe I don't have to fundraise anymore. You know, a win-win. I love creating win-wins.
Where did you write it? Where did you just sit down at home there and the Sunshine Coast and write it, or where did you do it?
Yes, Sunshine Coast. But this is materials. This is materials that I've worked on and worked for since 2009, and previously what was done in business, you know, to grow the business, to have that great first connection. So all the skills that I've learned from the time I was 19 to then losing a business, to growing the business, to understanding how to make that great first connection. And I started working in countries everywhere, and there's places that even like they don't know the language. You don't know the language, but we connect through our body language. And I remember being at a meeting in China. So it was a one-on-one meeting, and we had a translator. And so I was speaking to the head of a department, and I remember the translator, you know, translating what I was saying. And I looked and I went, "Oh, no. Excuse me. No, this is what I want to convey." And they both looked at me, and then they both said in English, "Do you speak Mandarin?" And I said, no, I just speak body language. And they laughed because I could tell something went wrong in that translation just by the face, like it should have been an up, but it was a down. So it's interesting, and it's a great thing to understand our body language and our mindset. So really, this book took 4 years from the time I first began with a beautiful lady on the Sunshine Coast here. I started to jot down all my ideas, and then I left it, and I was turning it and then I just went and used them for training, soft skills training. And what happened was, once Hachette approached me, I then had a deadline, of probably 12 months to put it back together. And they paid us to write the book, which meant I was able to give a third to charity. So my husband said, why would you give a third away? And I said, well, look, if I didn't write the book, we wouldn't have anything. So I said, I'll give a third to you, and I'll put a third back into training and education. So he was happy with that. We haven't sold a million yet, but I'd love to. Oh, can I let you know something, Mike?
Yeah.
So in actual fact, I said to Hachette Australia, because it was being published in Australia and New Zealand, I said, look, I work internationally. I'd love it to be international. They said, oh, you have to wait around 3 years, see how it goes before someone picks it up. Well, blow me down. We were due to release in May 2018. And I remember walking upstairs with this note in my hand. It was 11 o'clock at night. My husband looks at me, and I've got a little tear running down my face. So I thought he'd think I was upset. And he goes, what's happened? It's good news. And I said, yes, it is. But I don't know what it means. However, we got a note from Orion Books in England saying, we love your book. We got the whole team to read it. It's easy to read, easy to use, and it works. We want to make it Business Book of the Year for $7 in UK.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Well done.
So then they bought the international rights, and now it's been translated in Vietnamese, Taiwanese. They've got all different book covers. It's in every Commonwealth country, and Amazon reached out to Hachette Australia saying they're going to promote it in America. So pretty cool stuff.
That's excellent, though. Well done to you. And then, where did this one then come from?
Rightio. So a lot of the time, while I'm working with leaders, Fortune 500 companies, teams around the world and in Australia, I've worked with so many people. And what's happening is our leaders aren't really present. So I always speak about, conscious communication, conscious leadership, because when we're leading ourselves well, it makes such a difference. However, if the top is trained in great leadership skills and the bottom isn't, we still don't always match. And when we train all our teams, because, the leaders want the teams trained, but they're not taking on this same material, then once again, doesn't always work, right? So the conscious leader came about from working with a lot of amazing people around the world. Every chapter, I think you've just said that you've read it, so I'm interested to hear what you say.
I have read it, yeah. I got a question.
But I know when it's the first time it's ever been up for award, and it got Business Book of the Year, a silver, two of the judges came up to me and said to me, you should have seen my book. It had sticky notes, highlights. One lady said I wrote 7 pages of notes. The other lady said I wrote 5 pages of notes. So that's why it's out there, because we really do want to make a difference. And each chapter is a stepping stone on the other chapter. So I think to be able to connect and communicate well and lead are 2 of the most important skills that we can have on the planet.
I got a question. Is that I like stories. Okay, I write stories. Okay, so you did a lot of interviews here, right? Like and they're always in the grey background, I should say. And I like to read them. I mean, one I enjoyed here was this Leading in a Time of Crisis, an interview with Meredith Hilliker, who was the former chair of James Hardie, which was a difficult business when the world woke up and said, maybe asbestos particles floating in the air, not a good idea. Okay, so this poor woman had to work her way out of that. So I mean, I like reading these. They're sort of in a journalistic interviewing style. I enjoyed them. They're so well done. But what I want to ask is, where did you meet all these people? Because it's kind of a diverse bunch. There's a lady, Elaine Jobson, CEO of Jets Fitness. There's this other fellow, a forensic fellow, named Brian, I think. And the Dalai Lama, I think you met him too. How did you meet all these?
So, life is about taking opportunities, isn't it? And
Yes.
I remember speaking at an event in Sydney, and then I went to another event, and I remember that Meredith was at that event, and so then we met, and I had an interview with her, and it was just absolutely phenomenal. And when it came to Elaine is on the Sunshine Coast, but she started a gym for Richard Branson, who, was one of my mentors when I first started business. I was always looking to what he did to emulate it. But I found a lot of things really once we start to understand people. It's great to have a massage chair in the office, and it's great to have a ping pong table. However, that may not meet the needs of the different people. So understanding your team was one of the crucial things for me. And also one of the things that I love to do, as a leader of my team, was if I ever found out that their children were getting an award or that it was a sports day, they weren't allowed to come to work. I wanted them to be there because you just can't get those moments back. So traveling the world and just meeting people and taking the opportunities to have those conversations, I think is huge. So when I did some work with B1G1, and so they're in our last chapter. However, they connected me with the Bombay Mothers and Children's Hospital, and because I was working in India every quarter, I went out to see what they were doing, and I was just so impressed, and to see the lives that they were saving for free, but they need money to do that. So a third of everything that comes through the Conscious Leader is now going to the Bombay Mothers and Children's Hospital. I really love supporting people that really don't have what we have in Australia. Even if we needed water, we can get water no matter what. If we need food, we can get food. If we need clothes, we can get clothes. If we do need a roof over our head, we can get a roof over our head if we ask, if we seek it out. But a lot of places in the world that you just can't.
I agree. We had to, I tell you a small story. When I lived in Johannesburg, also like myself, because I played polocross, I had horses, and I had a number of staff. One of them he worked for in Malawi. Okay, he was from Malawi, and I asked him one day. I said, Benjamin, how do you get home? So from Johannesburg, he had to get a bus, another bus, another bus. And then he had to borrow a bicycle. Then he had to walk. It was like an incredible journey. It was like 4 or 5 days just to get home. And we used to have these buckets of small buckets of chlorine to put into the pool. And he always wanted the buckets. And they're about yay big, quite small. And I said, why do you want all of these buckets? What do you do with them? He says, no, he sends them back to Malawi, to his family, to the children. What are they doing? He says, if they're half full, a small child can carry them. I thought, unbelievable, unbelievable. I said, where they go? No, they go down the river, half full, and the little ones, they're old, they're like 7 years old, carrying this back. That's where so when I read that, I had a flashback to that story with Benjamin. But we touch on Richard Branson in South Africa. He had I don't think they existed here. Virgin Fitness, the chain of.
That's what Elaine started. Elaine did that. Yeah.
We're here when in Australia.
No.
Oh, we're in South Africa.
In South Africa, yes. Yeah.
I must double check which one of the people I met, because when I was down there, he just put out a book. Okay, he sort of flashed. I had a meeting with them down in Cape Town. That's the head office, and then he fleetingly came and signed the book for me and vanished again because he had to rush up and buy a wine farm as one does, So I must just check. There was a bunch of ladies down. I wonder was one I heard. Interesting. I'll follow that up. But you also touched upon the fact is that there, with airlines, there was a problem. There was a big accident, and he was there handing out blankets. And I noticed you mentioned our previous Prime Minister who went on holidays when the country was on fire, So whereas Branson was there handing out blankets. You touch on about as a leader being present is important, okay? Which a lot of leaders seem to forget. And I see you touch on it nicely in your book as a thing.
Yeah, I think communicating is one of the biggest things. So I really liked what our Prime Minister of New Zealand was doing, was actually using social media, which everybody uses to give a message personally every day through that crisis. And, it's that simple. People just need to know the next steps. What is happening, what can we do, and informing people and keeping people informed is huge. You might know your plan in your head, but if the people don't know what the plan is, then it doesn't lead them to have hope for what's possible.
Yeah, I know she is a bit of a legend, that PM of New Zealand, with what she did. You also touched on about that massacre and how she pitched up in Muslim attire to meet the people in the area. That was the right thing to do, and to be present, is it? Because I think I was reading that and thinking, even if you don't have a great management style, you're not a great communicator, because nobody is a great communicator. They may have come from a background where every time they meet people, they cross their arms or they do something, But at least if you're turning up and being present and talking, and however good or bad or indifferent you are, I think that's important. I mean, I've my own experience. I've seen some leaders who just don't turn up, and you think it's extraordinary. They think they can run a business with emails. I think that's what a.
Well, the thing is, the other side of it is some people, really love that servant leadership where they step back and I'm here if you need sort of thing. However, in times of crisis, we also need them to step forward. So it's great to empower your managers and your teams, which is what we want. We don't have to be the leader micromanaging everything they do. However, in a time of crisis, we need to be communicating even better. And so to leave it to everybody else to either sink or swim, and we saw this a couple of times that happened. If they did well in a state, it's like, yeah, we got this covered. If they didn't do well, then the blame was on that premier in Australia. So, and I don't think that cuts it. I think as a leader, if it doesn't go well, it's your fault. If it does go well, then your team, it's the opposite way. It's the opposite way for me. Your team's done a great job.
I agree. You got to wear the lumps. I was thinking about that, about how, because my own experience, how I've seen leaders actually switch gears. We actually were doing an implementation of an SAP project. It was actually the biggest one outside any of the government any of the government's organizations. And this fellow was a great orator, and so we had to do change management, tell everybody what was going on. He rounded up the 200 top people in the company, put them in his auditorium, and he stood up there. And I prepared all of this. I gave him a lecture about change management. We prepared PowerPoint for him. And then he stood up there and he said, Mike's prepared all these slides. Just want to mention, he said, there's a bus leaving. It's got SAP on the side. If you get on, you're on the bus. If you're not, I'm going to leave you behind. And he walked out. He walked out. I thought, that wasn't how I planned it. Anyway, it worked quite well. because they were a lot of hard-nosed businessmen, and it was quite good that he had the street smarts to actually switch, because I knew every one of them would call him and say, have a bit of a moan, and he would handle it behind the scene. I thought it was very interesting to watch the switch in the styles.
Wow.
So what's on the cards next? What are you writing?
Interesting. I can't help but feel that there is a fiction book. If I ever wrote anything, it really was going to be a fiction book. However, it has been great to get all this business knowledge out, to hopefully make a big difference in the world. People that have read these books, have told us how they've improved their business. People that have been reading the Conscious Leader, and we loved the $1 Million Handshake, but this is totally now our favorite book. My husband said, I wish I knew all these things, years back when I was running my business. And I believe that all that information is out there for everyone, but sometimes when someone takes that time to bring it all together into one, it just creates that little Bible on leadership that you can go back to.
You make a good point, because if you think of education, they'll teach you accounting. You will do a course in business administration. They say this is the HR department, it's the production department, and this is kind of what they do. But there's no thread, there's no sort of empathy, there's no understanding of. There's actually people in there. There's actually people in there. I mean, my father always ran factories, and I was working in the factory from when he made me work in one of his friend's factory from the age of 14, which is illegal. But anyway, he said it was character building. But I'm very happy to be in a factory. I know those people, So, but I know there's a lot of people that just go do an MBA and hear about production. They don't actually understand the people, where they come from, and their backgrounds, and so I think that there's a lacking there, and I think you're addressing it well in your books.
Thank you.
So what's the next? You say you're thinking of writing a fiction book.
Well, it's been around there for a long time. Like, I came up with the Secret Sister, but there's a few of those floating around. So anyway, I will. That's in the background. I've really been asked to do a book on, speak the speaker secrets, and to take people through that journey, for all the steps from creating that keynote, how to formulate the book contents, turning it into online programs, how to do stagecraft, all these things, which of course in my books, I love having the QR code. So if you want to dig a bit deeper, you can then see live what we're talking about as well. Well, live through video. So yeah, I think that could be the next one. I'm just tossing up on the cover.
That's quite a landscape, because you're not just talking about a novel, you're talking about.
Oh, that's a non-fiction book.
Yeah.
That will probably be the next one. I'd say the speaker secrets.
And you're going to surround it with other technologies as well, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
So it won't be just a book. It'll be a lot of online material as well.
Oh, I do that in all my books. So at the end of most chapters, you'll see a little barcode, QR code. So I did that way back in 2018. I started doing that. I just thought I wanted to add as much value as possible. And because I have so much content and resources, it allows people to go, oh, I really want to dig a bit deeper with body language. Fantastic. Just jump on there. You want to know a little bit more about behaviors and for your teams, just jump on the QR code and learn about that. I just want to share a quote with you from this book. What you believe doesn't make you a better person. The way you behave does. And because what we believe isn't always right, because we're protecting ourselves. We're making up stories. And I need to be right. because if I'm not right, that means I'm wrong. However, it comes through in the way that you behave. What we do is what makes a difference. You know, do we react or do we respond?
Well, we've run out of time, but in closing, could you just repeat that quote?
Yes, sure. What you believe doesn't make you a better person. The way you behave does.
Excellent. Cath Molloy, thanks for being here for a chat. I really appreciate it.
It's been wonderful, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye.
See ya.